Meet Reed Lance Rosenthal, rancher, #1 best-selling award-winning author, and unabashedly, unapologetically on the right side of the outstanding issues of our generation. But don't try to fence him in. Sometimes his positions will surprise you, because Reed is definitely his own man, with his own opinions. You might love him, you might hate him, but you won't be able to stop listening. Step over to the right side with Reed.
Howdy, listeners and viewers, coast to coast, the Gulf to Canada, and around the globe. Reed Lance Rosenthal on the Right Side Radio and on video. Reed Lance Rosenthal, The Cowboy's Take. Thanks for joining me. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching if you're watching the videos. Rumble, YouTube. We'll talk about YouTube here in just a minute. And a host of other platforms. All the links are on the ontheRightSideRadio.com website. Click on the link, you're on the channel or the platform of your choosing. And while we're on that, why don't I recommend you don't use YouTube? First of all, YouTube is owned by Google. I don't know if you know that or not. And Google is not your friend. I've brought you articles about at least 41 instances of election interference. You're very familiar with all the censorship, algorithms, suppression, deleting, you name it. So we're going to go there. I will tell you that 2 of my 6 or 7, whatever videos, this is a fledgling video thing by us, were taken down by YouTube in the last week for medical misinformation. Evidently, Google has not read all the recent peer-reviewed published studies on what's going on with the jab, and with COVID, and with statistics, and with turbo cancers, and with myocarditis. Evidently, Google and YouTube haven't bothered to read Pfizer and Moderna's own studies, where they say it's not a vaccine, it's a gene therapy drug. Evidently, they haven't read the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals opinion that it's not a vaccine, came out just in the last month. Evidently, they haven't read the several studies which have come out just in the last several weeks on the adverse effects to pregnant women or women who who conceived shortly after getting the jab. Evidently, they haven't read any of this because they're still citing the time-old, worn, now discarded, proven incorrect, proven to be lies, nonsense from the CDC and Tony Fauci's NIH when they were spouting that nonsense. Even the CDC has now admitted that maybe not everybody needs to get boosters. And, oh, by the way, even though we recommend them, because they're safe and effective. And maybe there is some kind of markers here for heart inflammation, myocarditis in the tests, and et cetera, et cetera. I'm not going to start. The point of what I'm trying to tell you is these videos were taken down illegally by Google and in contravention of my and your First Amendment rights. My right to speak, your right to hear. And that tells me we're right over the target. Now, I don't know how much money Google gets from Big Pharma. I don't know how joined at the hip, although it must be very joined at the hip because they listen to the recommendations of the NSA and the FBI and the National Security folks and whoever happens to be in power, if it's not a Republican. But Google is not your friend. I've told you this a million times. And do you know how YouTube gets paid? They get paid by the number of viewers that use YouTube. They get paid by the number of clicks, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So you are supporting the enemy. It's like buying coffee at Starbucks. It's like buying clothes at Target. It's like taking your kids to Disneyland. Woke Disney. Poor Walt. He would just turn in his grave. It's like any of those things, folks. It's like buying things at Tractor Supply, who now says they've seen the light and all the wokeism is gone. Okay, whatever. I'm going to suggest you use the other video channels. And I guess a rumor was perpetrated, gee, I wonder by whom, that you need to pay to use these other channels like Rumble. That's not true. You can go right on Rumble. It's seamless, it's effortless. It's actually easier to use than YouTube, to be honest with you. And the other platforms are good too. So if you want to see the video, I suggest strongly Rumble. Yeah, we'll continue to post on YouTube, but they will be very abbreviated, and they will be mainly to help people find us on the other platforms. Because I'm not changing what I'm saying. I'm not altering the facts to please the woke kids at Google who, shall we say, lack in some ways a proper education that would afford them the curiosity, the intellectual curiosity to find out what's going on with things so that they can properly, exercise their review for community safety. Community safety. You go out and get that 7th booster, you'll be safe and effective. Oh, yeah, you will be safe and effective. Anyway, just want to give that little deal and get it out of the way. And I wrote them a letter. I peeled, as if that's going to do anything. I wrote them a letter, and I'm going to post that on YouTube, probably, and maybe on the other platforms, and certainly on the website. I think you get a kick out of the letter I wrote them. But let's move on to the events of the last week. Let's talk about what this show is going to be about, because we got a lot to cover, a lot. So number one, I'm going to give you kind of a history of attempted and, unfortunately, successful assassinations of presidents and presidential candidates in the United States since inception. It's way more than you think. It is, unlike what you may hear, including, by the way, on conservative channels, not all Republicans. It's about 60% quote unquote Republicans, conservatives, and about 40% quote unquote liberals, Democrats. So it's kind of equally spread. It's a malady, a violent malady that affects the body politic without real regard as to where people stand on various issues, at least in terms of ideology. And I think you'll find it fascinating. And I think you need to know it in view of what happened with the near miss with Trump here at the beginning of this week, basically last weekend. I'm then going to bring you up to speed. And listen, you've heard all sorts of crud, nonsense, conjecture, BS on what happened there. I've put together a pretty good presentation. It's short, it's a bullet point. It'll bring to you kind of all the key things that are in discussion, that have been discovered, that are not being discovered, that are being withheld. But most importantly, we have put up a link on the On the Right Side Radio website, kind of like the COVID link, kind of like the Ukraine link, where you can go in and really go into detail on those really complex subjects. And we have, I don't know, a score of videos and dozens of articles by all different sources, by the way, by people who think one thing and are on one side of the political spectrum, and ABC News and NBC News and, the standard MSM gag me folks. And I'm not really sure about some of these things yet. I'm beginning to form a pretty solid opinion. I'll give that to you at the end of my little bullet point discourse of the events that transpired, at least as much as we know so far, on Saturday. But there's something not right. There's something really not right about what happened there. And whether it was incompetence, or whether it was intentional, or whether it was intentional incompetence, deniable culpability remains to be ferreted out. Unfortunately, the investigation is being done by the FBI, the Hunter laptop FBI, the tell Twitter what to post, what not to post, who to suppress, and what not to mention FBI. Oh, and Facebook and Google and etc. The FBI that basically exercised 4 illegal, unconstitutional FISA warrants. The FBI that lied about spying on Trump. The FBI for whom Comey and Peter Strzok and Lisa, his lover, worked for, and Baker, right, the attorney for the FBI at that time. And look, you're familiar with all that stuff, but this is the same FBI that is investigating this incident, folks. And there already seems to be missing evidence, or we can't talk because it's an investigation, and similar types of matters, right? I mean, we've heard it all before. It's kind of like old road. And it's the same FBI who, along with the Justice Department and the Department of Homeland Security, our friend Mayorkas, put together a commission on what the grave terrorism threats are to the United States right now. And I'll get into that in the course of today's show. And you'll be pleased to know that they really have it nailed. They know exactly who's dangerous to the United States, folks. Yep, they surely do. Yep, they do. Kind of like Hunter's laptop was Russian disinformation, kind of that good. All right, without further ado, of course, we're going to have the rant story and the founder's quote, etc. And if we have time, rat-a-tat-tat, some of which is economic, and you need to know it because they're lying to you. It's just simple as that. This is the real stats as opposed to their stats. It's amazing what people will do and where they will not draw the line at perpetrating acts or failing to act when they think they're going to lose their power and their paycheck and whatever other incidental checks they have coming their way. Joe in China, Joe in Ukraine, Joe in Romania, Joe in Russia, etc., etc. So, without further ado, let's do our founder's quote. And given what's been going on the last 3 years, what's been accelerating the last 6 months, what happened on Saturday, I think this one is perfect. It's Benjamin Franklin, another of my favorites of the founders, by the way. Quote, "Rebellion to tyrants is obedience to God," unquote. By the way, as an aside, an historical little comment here, that was originally proposed by Franklin to be the seal of the United States. Instead, of course, E pluribus unum was chosen. And now for the rant story. So, this is really kind of an interesting story. So you sell bales of hay if you're a hay seller. You sell bales of hay based on either weight, how much per ton usually is the measurement that you peg a price to, and what a lot of the commodities markets peg the price to, or you sell by the bale. And if you sell by the bale, then people, and that's primarily for horses and that kind of critter, that's a higher grade, higher quality hay, which is kind of what we specialize in. Cow hay is different, sheep hay is lower than that, and goat hay, well, put them out in the backyards, they'll eat all your weeds for you. So we have a longtime buyer for a number of years that buys consistently 30 to 35 bales from us every year. And they're kind of a stickler on weight. Now, most people are not. I mean, we take 2 bales down. We try and take what we think might be a lighter bale, what we think might be a heavier bale, because bales off at different parts of the field, bales which have different types of grasses, bales which were baled, twined, and wrapped, depending upon what kind of bale you're doing, might have different weights due to moisture content in the grass or humidity when they were baled. Even little things like that can affect tonnage, can affect weight. And our bales this year, because we had to switch balers because our old baler blew up. It had an unfortunate demise after 4 bales. It was very sad. We had a little baler funeral out there. That bale put out 5x5 bales, and it was about 2 inches short on each bale in every dimension, but it was 5x5. And they weighed 1,150, give or take, pounds, because there is some variation between bales. And that was last year and the years before when this particular buyer bought hay from us. This year we had to switch to the JD baler, which net wraps the bales rather than string ties the bales like the old baler. And it was pumping out bales which, number one, were much more dense. In other words, they weigh more. And number two, were 4 inches taller if you stood them up on end, and 4 inches wider. So they were big bales compared to last year's. And last year's, and the year before, and the year before, we know what those weights were, give or take 10 pounds a bale. And we took 2 of these bales down to the state certified scales in the local town. And they weighed, basically we got a weight and then we divided it by 2. And basically they were in the 1325 to 1350 range, right in there, 1,350 pounds. And one of them was grass, which weighs less than grass alfalfa. So we felt confident saying about 1,350 pounds on the bales. Anyway, this gentleman comes out and he usually picks up 10 bales at a time, picks up the first 10 bales, and he texts me and he goes, well, we just weighed these on the ranch scale, and our scale is certified, and they only weigh 1,025 pounds. And I kind of thought for a minute, and I went, that's impossible. There's no way that this is only 1,025 pounds. I mean, the bale is bigger, denser, heavier. I can feel it with the reach lift when I pick it up. I mean, when you get to know a machine, you know how much weight it's picking up. Anyway, make a long story short, I kind of told him my opinion, and he told me about the scale. And I finally said, either something happened to your scale since the time it was certified. I never did find out when that was. Could have been years ago. Or, you are incorrectly calculating the GVW of the trailer that the bales are loaded on when you're weighing them, because that trailer has all sorts of extra iron pieces and rails and all sorts of stuff. Anyway, the bottom line of all this is that, rather than run around and weigh a bunch of bales and waste a bunch of time, we quickly and amiably, and we're both happy with it, resolved it, that he would pay for 28 bales but get 30, or he would get 32 bales for the price of 30. I mean, it's really 6 of one, half dozen the other. In one, you get a few more bales. Same cost. The dollars are 6 of one, half dozen of the other. And I'm happy with it because it saved me a bunch of time, and time is money. So the moral of this story, this ranch story, is no matter what the problem, there's always a fix if 2 reasonable people can agree to employ their logic that they will both be happy with. So, next time you get into a little sticky wicket with somebody, keep that in mind. And if that doesn't work, well, then you can go to the next level. Okay. Let's talk about let me get my notes here. Let's talk about the history of assassinations or attempted assassinations of presidents of the United States. You're going to be very surprised by this. Very. I was, to be honest with you. And I knew most of it, but I didn't know all of it, not the details. First attempt, January 30th, 1835. Richard Lawrence, that's the assassin's name. He's actually attempted assassin. Tries to shoot President Andrew Jackson at the Capitol. Both of his pistols misfire. So Trump is not the only lucky president that is walking around today, although a lot of people do equate him to Andrew Jackson, so maybe they have that in common too. April 14th, 1865. We're all familiar with this. Abraham Lincoln is assassinated by actor John Wilkes Booth, a radical Southerner. And he was watching a play called Our American's Cousin in Ford's Theater in Washington. Conspirators, you probably did know this, or perhaps you forgot, conspirators of Wilkes tried to kill a bunch of the cabinet members and the vice president of Abraham Lincoln that same day. They were unsuccessful, except they wounded Secretary of State William Seward. July 2nd, 1881. President James Garfield, is shot by Charles J. Guiteau at a train station in Washington, right in a train station. And Garfield, by the way, another interesting historical sidelight, probably could have survived, but his doctors botched it up and it became infected and he died in September. Remember, he was shot in July. September 6, 1901, just 20 years later, President William McKinley is shot and killed by Leon Sogolsk at the Pan American Exposition in Buffalo, New York. He also, by the way, dies of infection, gangrene, 8 days later. October 14th, 1912, former President Teddy Roosevelt, many of you may not know this, he was seeking his second term, and he is shot and wounded by a guy by the name of John Schrank while he's campaigning in Milwaukee, where the RNC convention is being held right now. The bullet was slowed down and its effect was dampened because he was shot. He was carrying a heavy bunch of papers, including his speech. And the bullet passed through that, but it did penetrate his chest, and he was severely wounded. But kind of like Trump, he continued the program. In other words, even after being shot, Roosevelt addressed the crowd, read the speech, and then seeks medical treatment. Pretty tough hombre. Kind of like the guy who pumped his fist 3 times last Saturday. February 15th, 1933, Giuseppe Zangara. He tries to kill President-elect Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Did you know that? Did you know somebody tried to knock off FDR? In Miami, his first shot misses Roosevelt. And in the ensuing struggle over the gun, the poor mayor of Chicago, his name was Anton Cermak, was killed. Wrong place, wrong time. On September 8th, 1935, Huey P. Long, he was a senator. You probably heard the name. He was, kind of on the KKK fringe. But he's from Louisiana, and he was expected to run for president in 1936. He is shot and killed at the Louisiana state capitol. Carl Weiss was the attempted, or actually the successful assassin, but it's believed that Long was actually killed by one of his bodyguards, the bodyguard firing at the attempted assassin. Nobody's ever really figured it out, but that's the historical note on that one. November 1, 1950, Puerto Rican nationalists try to kill President Harry Truman, who's temporarily residing, because the White House was being remodeled, at the Blair House, kind of the secondary presidential residence. In fact, right now it's used for the vice president's residence. And he was mortally wounded. This was the Puerto Rican nationalist who tried to kill him, by White House policeman Leslie Koffelt, who, by the way, was also mortally wounded. They both died. The cop who stopped it and the would-be assassin. On December 11th, 1960, Richard Paul Pavlik has plans and is all set to do it. Cars loaded with explosives. He's waiting at an intersection before he's caught. He plans to crash into the car of President-elect John F. Kennedy and blow it up with dynamite. And he changed his mind at the last minute, right before the cops nailed him, because he saw the president's wife and kids and had second thoughts. Kind of interesting. By the way, he goes back to his plot to try and kill Kennedy at a later date, but he's arrested before he could make the second attempt. On November 22nd, 1963, Kennedy is, very unfortunately, shot and killed in Dallas. And, we're just learning, think about what happened on Saturday. We're just learning 60 years after that event that many of the things we were told about that event were flat lies. including CIA involvement and knowledge. It's amazing how history repeats, is it not? And he was killed by Lee Harvey Oswald, they say. I don't believe it. And Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone, they say. I don't believe it. And I don't care what the Warren Commission came up with. I'm familiar with weapons. Lee Harvey Oswald could not have gotten off 3 shots in that space of time at a moving target 200 feet below him, which is the most difficult shot in the world, and connect. No way. Couldn't happen. All right. I don't want to go down that path. It might be a show for a later date. On June 5th, 1968, presidential candidate, and probably would have won, Robert F. Kennedy is shot and killed by Sirhan Sirhan in the kitchen of the Ambassador Hotel in Los Angeles after the night he wins the California primary. I mean, he was on his way to the presidency. And by the way, as another historical sidelight, that was just 2 weeks, or actually 2 months, 2 months after the assassination of Reverend Martin Luther King. It's amazing how all these things kind of flow together and are interconnected. On March 15th, 1972, Arthur Bremer shoots Democratic presidential candidate George Wallace in Laurel, Maryland. Wallace survives, but he's paralyzed from the waist down from that point on. 3 other people, by the way, historical sidelight, were wounded. By the way, Bremer originally planned to kill President Richard Nixon, but he was never able to get close enough to do so, even though he tried on several occasions. On February 22nd, 1974, Samuel Bick hijacks a DC-9. Think about 9/11, folks. I wonder where they got the idea. With the intention of crashing it into the White House to kill Nixon. He's fatally shot by police before he can get the plane off the runway. September 5th, 1975, Lynette Squeaky Frome. Remember her? What a whackball. She's a supporter of mass murderer Charles Manson. Another whackball. She tries to shoot President Gerald Ford in Sacramento. Her gun misfires. Another really lucky president. On September 22nd, 1975, Sarah Jane Moore shoots at poor Gerald Ford again. I don't know what they didn't like about this guy, but obviously they didn't. She shoots at Ford in San Francisco, but she misses. March 30th, 1981, John Hinckley Jr., another whackball, shoots President Ronald Reagan as he exits the Hilton Hotel in Washington. And by the way, he was much more seriously wounded than the press or the White House let on. He actually passed the reins of power to his Vice President Bush, the elder Bush, because he thought he wasn't going to make it. Just a little historical sidelight. By the way, James Brady, his press secretary, that is the moment that he was severely wounded in the head and crippled from thereafter. Yeah, you've probably seen him on TV at least years ago before he died. 1993, there was a plot to kill President George H.W. Bush, the younger Bush, by car bomb in Kuwait. I'm kind of familiar with Kuwait. That's a story for another day. And the assassins, it was found, were in the employ of Iraqi President Saddam Hussein. I wonder if that had anything to do, and by the way, I misspoke. George H.W. Bush is the elder Bush, 1993, not the younger Bush. But I wonder if that had anything to do, I got ahead of myself, with decisions of the younger Bush to, shall we say, contrive reasons for going into Iraq. We shall see. Maybe history will tell us eventually. November 11th, 2011, Oscar Ramiro Ortega Hernandez. He fires multiple shots at the White House. He strikes the building, breaks windows, but he doesn't injure any members of the cabinet or Barack Obama's family. 2018, pipe bombs are mailed by Cesar Sayo Jr. to a number of leading Democrats, including, by the way, Obama and former presidential candidate Hillary Clinton and future President Joe Biden, our president cadaver. No harm came from that. They were intercepted, safely exploded, etc. But what's really interesting about this is that this is kind of, it's inexcusable. But this type of violence is not new to American politics. But there are some exceptions in this violence. JFK was killed for ideological and pecuniary, monetary reasons, because he was going to dismantle the deep state. He was going to end the Vietnam War. He didn't go, as most of the deep state wanted him to war with Russia. Instead, he and Khrushchev worked it out in Cuba. This was not the type of deep state president that the deep state wanted. And he was warning of the military-industrial complex, which was warned about by his predecessor, Eisenhower. So there was a reason for his killing. It wasn't just a whack-ball, although they tried to kind of put it in the historical context of all the other whack-balls that had taken shots at presidents. And I'm going to let you form your own conclusion. But I think the assassination, or the assassination of Kennedy and the attempted assassination of Donald Trump have a lot of similarities. That building from which the shooter shot, supposedly, we'll get into that. And remember, when I tell you it might be the best setup on the entire web of all the articles and videos. And you get both sides. You can form your own opinion. You can listen to former Secret Service agents, former security details, government officials, whatever, current administration people. And you can form your own opinion as to what occurred and what likely was the reasons for its occurrence. I really, really urge you to do that. And I urge you to send that link, by the way, out to other people so that they have the benefit of seeing all this stuff congregated. I mean, it's been flying everywhere. Internet and TV and radio. This is all amalgamated in one place. If you sit down and you go through that stuff on the link that we have on therightside.radio.com, and it's going to be attempted Trump assassination or something along those lines. That's what it'll be labeled. Upper right-hand corner, homepage. You'll have enough information to start forming an opinion, maybe even to form an opinion, because it's fascinating. And it's like an onion. Every time you peel a layer, there's another layer. Very interesting. All right. So why don't we start, I think, that dialogue, shall we? Because this was a major occurrence in American history and American politics at a historical moment in time when America is, other than back there before the Civil War in the 1860s, where America is more divided than it's ever been, where we have more enemies abroad than we've ever had, and powerful enemies, not, the mouse that roared. And it's absolutely critical that we understand what happened, who is culpable, if there is any culpability, what may have prompted it, and who the actors may have been. It is critical. Let's begin. Let me tell you how I'm going to approach this, because the internet, the news waves, you have heard zillions of things from zillions of sources, some credible, some not, some ideologically, shall we say, motivated, others not. I'm going to give you, to begin with, a list of the known facts, not conjecture. Then I'm going to give you some of the conjectures that are out there. I'm going to clearly label them before I do the bullet point. And then I'm going to give you my conclusions. But I want to really emphasize that all this stuff is on, we'll call it the Trump attempt page on ontherightsideradio.com. I mean, videos out the yin yang from all sorts of experts. I don't pretend to be an expert. I'm very familiar with long range shooting under stress, which is yet another tale. So there's some things I know, there's some things I don't know. I have never participated in any protection, really, of any person. Quite the contrary. It is important that you take the time. First of all, you will find it absolutely riveting, absolutely fascinating. It is important that you take the time to read the articles. There's not, none of them are long articles, they're short. And particularly watch the videos, because the videos don't lie. And then you can watch the interviews of various people who are experts in this field, who have dissected this from 0 to a million. And it'll be interesting to see what kind of conclusion you reach, if it comports with mine or if it is different. I'd love to know. Put your comments in underneath whatever video you're watching. Send me an email if you're listening to me on the radio, on the right side at Reagan.com, on the right side radio, at Reagan.com. Send me an email, please. I'd really like to know your opinion, what you think, really, the rest of the story, so to speak, went on out there in Pennsylvania a few days past. This is the fate of our republic at stake. We cannot allow this to happen. We have to expose what happened, determine the culpability, and hold those culpable fully accountable, including those that committed and anybody involved in this, if it does turn out that way, committed treason. Listen to my shows on therightsideradio.com on treason, just over the last 6 to 8 weeks, 3-part series. Yep. That's exactly what we're dealing with. One way or the other, by the way. And there's really only 3 explanations for this. This was just totally incompetent error, a combination of incompetent error, coincidence. I'm not a big believer in coincidence. This was deliberate negligence. This was purposeful error. And within that context, there's a whole bunch of other things that you could say, this might have happened, that might have happened, this could be, that might be. I'm very concerned that is the FBI doing, the FBI, they're great. They're so trustworthy. And I'm not talking about the agents whose boots are on the ground. I'm talking about the hierarchy. In fact, when I'm talking about the Secret Service, I'm not talking about those folks who rushed that stage and used their bodies to shield Trump. I'm talking about the people at the top, the people who were appointed by Biden, Obama third term, and then appointed the managers underneath them, so they would have somebody to pawn it off on, because the left is great at shifting blame, right? Shifting blame. All right. Here are the facts. These are facts. Once again, I urge you, go to the website, watch the videos, read the articles, see the pictures, make your own determination. Number one, the primary security perimeter, which is key. It's key for an attacker. It's key for a defender of an important person. That was set at about 150 yards. Now, 150 yards, folks, is a football field and a half, which is Zippo. Zippo. There are rifles that can shoot accurately a half a mile. That's 2,500 feet. That is 250 100-yard football fields. Why was that perimeter set so close in. Number two, there is confusion and there's finger pointing going on right now. How convenient, between local police, state police, and the Secret Service. You were in charge of that part of the perimeter. No, you were, etc. I mean, purposeful confusion. We are expected to believe that a 20-year-old either knew there was a ladder there or carried a ladder and a rifle, unseen until he got the ladder in position, seen by many and filmed with the rifle, both on the ground and up on the roof. And this kid, who's supposedly shy and quiet and etc., he was able to do all this undetected, more or less, and certainly undeterred. We're expected to believe that he got off 7 shots before there was, quote unquote, return fire. If you listen to the audible waves, which I have done and others have done, by the way, you'll find that there is at least 3 different audible waves, which would indicate 3 different firearms. The FBI supposedly has his cell phone, but they weren't able to crack it. Really, the FBI can't crack a cell phone. But now they've cracked it. But you know, this is an investigation, so we can't tell you what's on it, but there's really not much on it. That's a fact. This kid's social media accounts were scrubbed. Who scrubbed them is a question we might all ask. What was on them is a question we might all ask. There's a twin, an absolute look-alike to this kid with a very similar name. Is this really the person that we're talking about? This other Matthew Crooks, or whatever his name is, was at the Antifa riots in Portland, the Antifa riots in Seattle, and the Antifa mess in San Francisco. Some other interesting things about the shooter. Number one, the press keeps showing him in this gray t-shirt with an American flag. I mean, he's like, I don't know, 8 or 9 years old. I mean, people do change. Mm-hmm. And the press is very careful not to talk about his background. Nothing is known about him. The police don't have anything. The FBI aren't to his phone. I find this really, really suspicious. I mean, really, really suspicious. And this kid, supposedly, I have the video on the website, was in a commercial when he was in high school that was sponsored by and put on by BlackRock. Now, I don't know if there's any connection or not. Maybe that really is a coincidence. But then again, I'm not a believer in coincidences. You know, yes. The more confusion, by the way, the better for the enemy trying to conceal a course of action, a plan, or a feat, or an attempted feat. There were casualties in the stands. If you look carefully at these videos, particularly that poor fire chief that got shot, you'll see as you are looking at Trump, that fire chief is shot on the left-hand side of the stands. I haven't heard anybody talk about this. It's something I've noticed. And he was 4 or 5 tiers of stands up. You can see people turning around to try and help him after he goes down. That does not comport with rifle fire coming off the roof from the 20-year-old. There were 2 gals on this in-close security detail. This was the crew that surrounded Trump, got him into the car. You'll notice one in the videos, kind of longer hair, cowering behind the bleachers. And she didn't move. I mean, she just stayed hunkered down there, not wanting to get hurt. You could see the SWAT teams going up the steps as she's hunkered down behind the bleachers. The other gal you saw literally using the mound of Secret Service bodies on top of Trump as a shield. She didn't get in on the mound. She didn't use her body as a block. This is the gal who couldn't holster her pistol, clear as a bell, kind of slightly overweight. She couldn't holster her pistol after a number of attempts. I can flat guarantee you that one of the things you train on is quick draw, quick back in. Okay? It all takes time. Time is life and death in a situation like this. It appears that Shapiro, the Democratic governor of Pennsylvania, where there was, some of you may not believe this, existential fraud in the 2020 elections. And we're not going to go into that right now, but it's been proven. And in fact, one of the videos is the guy who did the forensics on it because he's a forensics expert. It's a terrific video. I believe the name is Joe Ball. You'll see it. I'm going to have it on the website too, in addition to on the Trump attempt page. These two gals were DEA agents, never trained in personal protection, never trained to protect, the principal. And those are the two gals who didn't know what to do and unfortunately cowered, and one of them couldn't even holster her weapon. Mayorkas is the head of DHS. The Secret Service is part of the DHS. Sheehy, the gal that runs that runs the Secret Service, answers to Mayorkas. Sheehy is a woke progressive. I mean, a perfect plant for the Obama mindset, the Obama cabal, if you will. Two other interesting things about Sheehy. Number one, she refuses to resign, even though this was an epic fail, even if it was totally unintentional, just sheer incompetence, sheer negligence. Number two, when she was first questioned about why this supposed shooter could get on the roof of that building 150 yards away from the president, she said, well, that was the jurisdiction of the Pennsylvania people, the local cops, and the state patrol. In other words, shuffling the blame out. Remember that it's a Social Security. It's the Secret Service that sets that perimeter. And that building should have been within the interior perimeter. In other words, Secret Service domain, primary domain. Number three, she specifically said when she was questioned further on why there was no police and there was no Secret Service on that roof instead of a supposed shooter. Well, the guy was definitely a shooter. The supposed shooter. She said two different things. Number one, she said, well, there was supposed to be a local cop there. Well, obviously there wasn't. Whose fail is that? Since the Secret Service told everybody they were in charge of this operation. And number two, she said that there was no Secret Service on that roof because it was sloped and it was metal and it was slippery. Reaching back in my experiences, a shallow, sloped metal roof does not seem to be like a high-risk hazard. It certainly wasn't to the 20-year-old supposed sole shooter. And it certainly wasn't to the sniper team, which are clear in the photos and the videos behind Trump. In fact, that roof appears more sloped and also metal than the slope of the roof from which this kid, whoever he really is, supposedly took the shot. Whose trajectory does not match either the photograph from the New York Times or the wounds in Trump's ear. I find all this to be disturbing. I find it to be a CYA scramble because the plan didn't work and you have to explain it type thing. And another of those pesky coincidences. And I don't believe in coincidences. And one other really interesting thing about Kimberly Cheadle, I know I call her Sihi, personal joke, she is woke, but going beyond that, the Secret Service's director's name is Kimberly Cheadle, Cheatle, for the record. It just so happens that she was on Jill Biden's Secret Service team before she was named director of the Secret Service. And it just so happens that she and Jill Biden, who, of course, the last thing Jill would want to do is stay in office or parade around dementia-ridden old men in embarrassing situations so that she could, maintain the trappings of power and glitter. It's Jill Biden who talked Biden and Mayorkas into putting her buddy, Miss Cheadle, into the position of the Secret Service director. So there is a direct link from the Secret Service director who admits that the buck stops with her on this miserably failed security operation and the Biden White House. In fact, it couldn't be more direct. You'll notice that in Biden's in-close security detail, there are no women. And there's certainly no person, never mind woman. I have nothing against, I've seen women who are really proficient. Boy, you don't want to go up against them. But if you're protecting a 6'6" guy, then you can't protect his body with your body if you're 5'6", period. And you certainly can't drag or pick up a 6'6" guy. This is just common sense. Those two women were selected by Shapiro to augment the Secret Service, which brings us to another interesting factoid. The Trump team has been asking, including the Secret Service people on the Trump team, for additional Secret Service security. Mayorkas refused. Only for this event did he release a little bit of extra help. He had Shapiro, how convenient, provide some of it, like the two DEA gals who've never been in this situation in their life and are not trained for it, like the local cops and the state patrol who were in charge of the second layer of perimeter outside the ridiculous 150-yard circle. Mayorkas, I think we are all aware, has allowed 9 to 10 million illegal aliens to cross the United States border. Amongst them, by the way, terrorists and criminals. Hundreds of thousands, not 1,000, not tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of Americans have been adversely affected. Thousands of Americans have lost their lives due to these illegal aliens. Car wrecks, drunken driving, robberies, rape, armed assault, you name it, murder. Obviously, Mayorkas doesn't care about that collateral damage. Mayorkas was put in place by Barack Obama. I've given you the association between the two of those going back to 2014. Barack Obama was the cause of 500,000 people dying in Syria and hundreds of thousands, including Christians, being slaughtered by ISIS because he didn't take ISIS out when his generals told him to, and because of the mess he created in Syria, not following I have this red line, not following the red line. That's when the situation really deteriorated over there. And of course, that also caused what? Oh, that's right, a huge quote-unquote refugee immigration into Europe, similar to the invasion we have now, altering forever the demographics, the consistency, and the, should we say all right. forever altering the consistency and the cohesiveness of European societies and countries, except for those like Hungary who refuse to allow them in. The same thing that's being done to the United States right now, with material adverse effects, impacts, including death and maiming and permanent disability to the residents of Europe, just as we are suffering right now with the illegal alien invasion on our southern border. Obviously, Mayorkas and the guy who put him in place, Obama, don't care about human lives. Everybody is expendable so long as they can maintain their power for monetary, power ego, and ideological reasons. There's a whole bunch more facts, right? Obama is the head of the Democratic Party. Biden is a puppet. Okay, and you can ask anybody. I mean, Biden has nothing to do with anything other than he's being obstinate right now and won't get out of the way. We'll talk about that in just a moment. Obama didn't just cause hundreds of thousands of deaths in Syria and via his reluctance to take out his buddies in ISIS or furnishing arms to Al Qaeda. You know, do you remember Benghazi? Yes, that's what that was all about. Proven, by the way, that's not surmise. But he also created situations in Libya with Hillary Clinton where tens of thousands of people, maybe hundreds of thousands now, I don't know, were killed when they took out Gaddafi. The refugees in Europe are creating havoc, just as the refugees here are also creating havoc. The refugees and the illegal aliens, which is really what they all are using American taxpayer money, close to $1 trillion over the last year or two, crowding American schools, crowding American hospitals, affecting the healthcare and the health and the lives of Americans and Europeans. They don't care. It's not what this is about. Saul Alinsky, right? Handbook for Radicals. The means justifies the end, or the end justifies the means, however you want to look at it. It's the same exact thought. Anything is permissible so long as you accomplish the goal. What did Obama say? Never bring a knife to a gunfight. Yeah, you betcha. And then you have Biden, who, let's face it, is not all there. In that donor call, literally days before this incident, talking about it's time to put a bullseye on Trump. Okay, look, that might have been a slip. He might have meant something else. There's an awful lot of coincidences here. And folks, I just don't believe in coincidences. You know, as a sidelight, in D-Day, World War II, the French underground received radio over the English Channel from England. And there was a prearranged code. Every night, French underground leaders would listen to the radio. And there was, you know, it seemed like poetry. But there was a trigger that told them that D-Day was coming and they needed to accomplish their jobs, taking down telegraph lines and interrupting communications and blockading roads, all the things that they were assigned to do the day and night before D-Day. And in that case, the phrase was, "Wound my heart with a monotonous languor." Wound my heart with a monotonous languor. That was the signal to the French underground that the invasion was the next day. I have on the website Biden's emails that are going out to his useful idiots, his campaign emails. Yes, I get them and I read them. Always know your enemy. And I want you to read the last few emails. The one, in fact, today, the day I'm recording, is "We Can't Back Down Now." And it goes on to, in great detail, about Donald Trump as the devil, and think about all the things he did and how scared you were when he took office the last time, and how he screwed up the COVID thing. And I can go on and on and on. In the meantime, they're telling us that they're toning down the rhetoric. You know, we need to not be heated. This is an ancillary kind of dot, because I'm bringing you a bunch of dots here, and I'm going to connect them into my opinion here at the end of this segment. I know for sure, and this is personal experience, that when you are in that kind of situation that 20-year-old was supposedly in, to be able to get off kill shots, you know you've been spotted. Remember the cop that went up to the roof? You know that they're snipers. You can see them on the other buildings. You're about to shoot at the former president and presumptive nominee for the president of the United States. You don't think you have a little adrenaline going? You don't think you're nervous a little bit? If this kid was really the shooter, not just a shooter of several, he had to have training to have come that close to taking out Trump. And he was in a tough position. Slippery roof, you know, when you're getting set up, if you're on a slope, things are rolling downhill, all sorts of stuff's going on. Supposedly, how convenient. He was kicked off, or he didn't make the shooter team in high school. Boy, this story just ties in too perfectly, doesn't it? Too perfectly. If you look at the photographs of his body, which, by the way, are now almost impossible to find on the web, I took some screenshots of them, you'll see that he was shot, in my opinion, in the back of the head. He wasn't shot in the front, which where the bullet entry would have been if the sniper team had been the one behind Trump. There was a second sniper team. We don't know where they were now, because they were an addition to the initial sniper team. That was one of the little additions that Mayorkas made for the Pennsylvania deal. And we don't have any of the ballistics back. We don't have the ballistics on the bullets that hit the three folks that were attending the rally, those poor people that got wounded, and the one horrific guy, a great guy who horrifically got killed. But if you look at where those people were shot, and you look at an angle from that roof to Trump, something is really off. I mean, the fire chief was at least, I'm judging, I didn't pace it off, obviously I wasn't there, at least 50 feet away from Trump, up and to Trump's right. There's a famous picture that the New York Times photographer, I forget his name, took, that shows the bullet past Trump's head. And I have it on the website, and you can find it on the web. Everybody's giving him big claps for getting the shot, and no pun intended. And it is a great picture. If you look at the twin holes in Trump's ear, one here, I mean, that's how much, it was millimeters, folks, millimeters. They're in perfect line. They're not at an angle. There's not an entry point here and here. Remember that the shooter, the kid, supposedly, who is the shooter, supposedly, he was elevated. There would be an angle in that shell. Enter, depart. Or, you know, on the opposite side, enter, depart. It's straight line. Look at that photo in the New York Times, from the New York Times. That bullet is straight out. It is straight out. It would be impossible, and I know this for a fact, to get that trajectory on that bullet and to have that particular wound in Trump's ear from that shooter, that 20-year-old, supposedly, on that roof in an elevated position. Flat impossible. Which brings us to the hypothesis of perhaps he was not alone, as does the shot in the back of his head when the sniper team seemed to be, we don't know where the second sniper team was, when the sniper team seemed to be basically in front of him, would have been a forehead or a face angled shot. So, mainstream media, another dot for you, and a fact. Mainstream media did not call it an assassination. They called it an incident. They called it a shooting. I will tell you that a shooting is when you shoot and nobody shoots back. A gun battle is when the other guy is firing. This is not a shooting. It was a gun battle, and it was an attempted assassination, and it certainly wasn't an incident. So they're trying to downplay it. You know, the Secret Service, I think the people right there, the primary detail, did as good a job as they could under the situation, putting aside the two DEA gals who, why don't we just say were not there, should never have been there. And now we have, this is a fact, the FBI investigating, and Mayorkas is saying he's going to investigate. Well, you know, that's kind of like asking the fox to investigate the missing chicken from the hen house. I mean, you can't make this stuff up, right? You really can't. All right. One other fact for you, and I could go on. There's a pile of facts, okay? A pile of facts. This other fact for you is Biden's no violence speech, you know, that he gave briefly the night of the incident, the night of the attempted assassination. He did a pretty good job on that delivery. And that means he practiced it. And this is my personal opinion now. He did make that speech. It was short. You'll notice that in that speech, he didn't denounce anything in particular, except we can't have violence, you know, and we're going to tone down the campaign or whatever he said. But I got the distinct impression watching him, and I've watched it like 6 or 7 times, even though it's gut-wrenching to watch. That speech was rehearsed. And that speech was insincere. And that speech was of somebody who was not surprised. You watch it, you figure it out for yourself. Maybe you'll totally disagree with me, but in my mind, that's a fact. That's another of those coincidences, which I don't believe in whatsoever. And the last fact is that the supposed shooter, which is really the only witness to the supposed shooter, is now dead. How convenient is that? Oh, and he didn't have any ID on him, so the FBI did DNA tests, and that's how they figured out who he was. Okay. It's kind of like the tests they did on Hunter's laptop, I guess. All right. So, look, there's a lot of rumors going around. I don't have any confirmation. The stuff is on the website. I have all the facts there for you that I've just gone over with you. You can listen to from experts, and there's many more I didn't even get a chance to cover here. But one of the rumors is this was not entirely the usual team of Secret Service. The Secret Service gave part of the team once again, I have not corroborated this, time off because they had worked 7 days in a row. So part of the team, besides the two DEA agents from Democratic Governor Josh Shapiro, steal the vote Shapiro, was probably not his usual team. And when you're protecting somebody, or if you are a attacker, if you are somebody out to get somebody, what you want is a team that's not cohesive with the principle, with the subject that's to be protected. Because they know each other. They know how they think. They know how they move. All of that, it's seconds, it's milliseconds, and it's critically important. There's another rumor out there, supposedly by one of the snipers. I don't know which one. I don't know which team. I don't know which person. And, it's one of those foggy bottom rumors. I mean, it could be something that somebody just made up, that they were told by Secret Service to stand down when they wanted to initially take the shot. And by the way, you don't have to ask for permission when you are protecting a principal to fire if there is a threat. Period. You don't have to ask for permission. You've been trained to discern threat from non-threat. You've been trained to see if that's some kid on the rooftop just trying to get a better view, or that's somebody up to nefarious purposes. Particularly since the kid on the rooftop, supposedly, had been tracked for over 45 minutes, give or take. From the time he tried to breach the outer perimeter, which was nowhere near where it should have been, had a range finder, and then local police lost him. So the Secret Service is blaming them for that. And then suddenly he's at the building where, once again, this is based on a number of sources, but I can't confirm it. He's on the roof of the building where the local police and state police had their kind of defense headquarters. And we know that all sorts of people were filming this guy for minutes before the first shots rang out and were yelling at cops and Secret Service. Secret Service never went over there. That's another little fact to store away. The local cops did go over there, and the one guy that got up there was threatened by the kid, dropped down. Look, I don't know what happened there, and he might have disrupted that kid just enough to kind of assist in the spoliation of the plot. But these are, one last. I keep saying one last. I mean, there's so many. There's so many. I'm just trying to give you the facts right now, or the conjecture where I think it's conjecture. You need to find out and decide for yourself. This is a fact, and we'll get into this if we get to rat-a-tat-tat in this show. Potential domestic terrorists, potential domestic terrorism. The FBI says it could be potential domestic terrorism. It's interesting that, and in the rat-a-tat-tat, if we get there, if not, we will next week, that the potential domestic terrorists who are the most threatening in the United States of America are, according to the commission that the FBI and the DHS put together, which, by the way, includes Clapper. Yes, Clapper and that whole crew, you bet. The treasonous bunch. Potential domestic terrorism, folks, is really the fault of, and most likely to be precipitated by, and to be wrought by Trump supporters. What are they setting us up there for in that statement and in that commission finding and the little paper that they put out? We'll get into that more later. So I've given you some of the conjectures that I really can't verify. I've given you the facts as I know them that are from many different sources. And I don't mean just sources of this type or that type. I mean, this is a whole bunch of sources that agree on this set of facts I just brought you. And there's a lot of facts that I didn't bring up because they are conjecture and conjecture kind of doubled. But I will tell you that there is too much going on here. There is no way, I'm not a believer in any coincidences. There's no way you could have these 20, 30 coincidences, facts that I brought you without it being intentional. And my thought is, to be quite honest with you, that this was not deliberate negligence. This was purposeful error. My thought is there was more than one shooter. There was at least two. I bring you back to the facts on trajectory and the wound in Trump's ear and the angle of fire from the supposed shooter, the kid on the roof. I bring you back to the fact that, at least from the photos I've seen, the kid on the roof was shot in the back of the head, the exact opposite direction of the sniper team that we are aware of. And I think, if I can sum this all up, this is really a JFK repeat moment. That building is the book depository in Dallas. That kid is Lee Harvey Oswald. He's the patsy. The building was the distraction. They did it once, right? Just bring out that playbook, dust it off, put it in a different geographical situation with slightly different building setups and trajectories, but it's really all the same, right? The grassy knoll in JFK, the shooter somewhere out there on the level, give or take, with Trump, so you'd have a flat trajectory. Yeah, that's exactly what I think. I really want to know what you think. Spend a little time on this. This is your country. This is your liberty. This is your freedom. And these people cannot be allowed to get away with it. And let me tell you, now that they have failed, they're going to try again. This is not over. This is just starting. Because they are desperate. They are criminals. They are traitors. They know they are criminals and traitors. They know we know they are criminals and traitors. And they have nothing to lose other than perhaps escape a rope or behind bars for the rest of their lives by doing more crimes, committing more treason to save their bacon. And in the meantime, if it works, maintain their power and the big bucks. So that's my thoughts on the attempt on Trump. And I'm going to bring you more if more comes available next week. But this is really my one big presentation on it. And I'm really relying on you folks to go to the website, ontherightsideradio.com, click on that attempt on Trump link in the upper right-hand part of the homepage and read that stuff. Watch those videos. Think about what I've talked about today. Think about what the people in the videos who are far more expert at this particular type of combat and protection situation than I am. And see what they think. See what they say. And there's some great ones. Secret Service, snipers from Canada, Secret Service from the United States, forensic specialists. It's compelling. I'll leave it at that. So I got to tell you one last thought. That picture of Trump pumping his fists, yelling "fight, fight, fight" under the American flag is the picture of the century. You mark my words, that is one of the most iconic pictures ever taken of an American situation like that. It ranks right up there, give or take, with that iconic picture of the Marines raising the flag on Iwo Jima. And it's going to make a big difference. It is a visual of a man's courage. You don't get to see that often. I mean, can you imagine Can you imagine if this was Obama or Biden on that stage? Oh my. Well, okay. We'll leave that at that.
Please remember, if you've missed any shows, just click on Show Archive and you'll find all of his shows. We look forward to seeing you here again next week for another episode of Read Lance Rosenthal on the Right Side.